Okay, I've heard all of you. Let's do a comparison of all the pendant Anthuriums that I have got in my collection. Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So as I said, I know everybody's been wanting this video for a while now, and this is going to be the comparison of all the pendant Anthuriums that I have got in my collection. And I do have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. I don't think I've got more than 4 at the moment, but let's dive into it, and let's start actually with the one that I've got right here. And the one that you're seeing right here, and I do want to measure, I'll see if I can add it somewhere at the top of the video, quite how long this longest leaf that I currently have. Is this the longest leaf so far? Possibly. That leaf here might be even longer. Absolutely stonking ridiculous. The Anthurium vittariifolium, for the people that might not recognize what this plant might be. And there is an awful lot of leathery belt-like leaves that are happening behind and in between some of my other plants here. And this is one of its newest leaves, and it is a very, very deep green at the moment. What you might be seeing here with some of the lighter green leaves and the wider leaves, these leaves have been on this plant for, I would say, coming up to 3 years now. This plant is probably at least 4, if not 5 years old. So the Anthurium vittariifolium, in my, and probably this is, shouldn't be starting the video like this, hands down, in my experience, so far, the king of all of my pendant Anthuriums. Grows fast, grows consistent, and the one thing, and I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir, I think most of you at this point who have been looking to get a kind of more pendant type Anthuriums, so the kind of trailing down Anthuriums, have probably got the vittariifolium recently or have got it a while back and you're growing it. And I'm assuming, based that I haven't heard any negatives yet, you're growing it happily. I will say a few things about when I first got it. So when I first got it, it took a while to get established. I'm thinking about a year before it started really being kind of large and in charge, really. Now, the thing about the Anthurium vittariifolium, and hopefully I'll add a picture here, you might be able to see some of the aerial roots, and it is giving a very reminiscent aerial roots to things like the Phalaenopsis orchids. And the Phalaenopsis orchids have got those really chunky, succulent aerial roots that are happening on there. And that brings me on to another point about the vittariifolium specifically, which I thought applied to all of my pendant Anthuriums, and I'll come on to that in just a moment, which is this plant desperately, for an Anthurium, needs to go dry, as in fully dry. So I grew this in a soil mix and it did really, really well. I was debating moving this back into a soil mix, but it is so difficult to move it now without destroying half of the plant that I've attempted to start the process twice this summer and I have backed down twice already. I do need to move this back into soil, I think. It is currently growing in semi-hydro and it's been growing happily in semi-hydro. My concern with this is I should have moved it into soil at the beginning of the growing season, which is probably what I'm going to plan on doing coming into the next growing season. That might change. I might come back from the holiday mid-September and just go, you know what? I'm doing it. I'm going to bite the bullet and do it. Because I think the reality is it grew a bit better in a soil mix. So that for me is the king of most of my pendant Anthuriums. It grows consistently. It grows long, kind of strap-like leaves. It's not for everybody. I understand that. But it is definitely a showpiece. It's definitely a showpiece. And for a plant that has that kind of like large foliage, the pot that it's in is probably not very big at all. And I've said this and I will say this again with all of these pendant Anthuriums. These are great that if you've got shelves, especially if you've got light coming in that way and nothing coming in from above like I do, it's a great thing to put on the top of a shelf you need to be smart on how you're going to do it, because it's got a lot of movement pulling it down forward, so you need to attach it somehow so it doesn't like lift itself off the shelf. I speak from experience with this one. That plant has thrown itself off the shelf more times than I would like to kind of like admit on here. But the one thing that I have done with that one, it is in a net pot at the moment, and I was able to pull some metal plant ties and attach it to the metal shelf structure underneath it, and it is anchored in super strong now. So touch wood. Don't want to jinx it. But yes, it is one that you can put at the very top, because it doesn't need top-down lighting. It just needs the leaves to get some lighting. Now, another thing that has come up, and I think a few people have said this specifically about some of my other pendant anthuriums, is you were saying that don't grow it upright in a pot, grow it so it kind of grows like it grows in nature on the side of a tree. True, yes, but most of these anthuriums, even if you start them up, the pendant ones, upright, they very quickly start moving towards a downwards motion. They kind of right themselves into the way that they would like to grow. So I didn't find that that's necessary. Also, because it's quite tricky, how would you balance a pot that's that way without everything dropping off? It's a minefield within itself. But yes, Anthurium vittariifolium also blooms like mad at this stage for me. It's a relatively mature plant at this point. Could it be even more mature? Yes, but as I said, I think it does need to be moved into that soil substrate again, and possibly moving it out of that net pot. But it is, and I will keep saying this until I'm blue in the face, it is one that you would like to at least let it go pretty much fully dry before you rewater it. This is one that will rot relatively quickly, but as long as you treat it like you would. So if you've grown Phalaenopsis orchids and you've got that balance of you need to wait until that soil, it's usually like orchid bark dries out fully, and then you flush it and you kind of let it fully hydrate, and then you kind of put it back out again and rinse and repeat in terms of the cycle, and you're growing those quite happily. Very similar. Very similar. Let's move to another very strong favorite plant, which is the one that you can see right here. This is the Anthurium friedrichsthalii, and let me show you. These ones I can actually, because they're a bit smaller, I can move and I can show you some of the foliage. It is strappy leaves. I think that's the widest leaf that I've got there. And they're relatively sizable. I mean, you can kind of see this is a plant that I've owned a year now. I mean, it was relatively decent size when I got it. This was an Equigenera purchase from a while back. And it is one that just grows really consistently. Can you see what I mean about the growth point that I was talking about? It will eventually right itself and just kind of start tipping itself out of the pot. This is in semi-hydro and it's doing really well. This is in semi-hydro, and I do pretty much have a water reservoir underneath this for most of the year, not just the summer, which I do with most of my other anthuriums, that if they're in semi-hydro, they will get a water reservoir in the summer, but not in the winter. This is one that will keep it on there. It's just a bit less frequent. This one grows really well. Really well. It's a slightly more compact, so if you don't want something that gets as huge as a vittariifolium, this is one that would still give you that vibe, but it doesn't get absolutely ginormous, because I know that that's not for everybody. This is still very cool. It still gives you that hanging thing. The one thing I will say, the vittariifolium is one that I generally don't have to worry too much about pests. This one has had thrips on it, and this one has had spider mites on it. Do they ever get to the point where it's like massively a problem? No. So that is something to remember, that this one, it can get some pests, but actually, you know what, it's completely fine. The roots are nowhere near as substantial or kind of thick as you might get on the vittariifolium. You can kind of see some of the aerial roots on there. They're still decent aerial roots, or at least the roots that are exposed to the air, but not kind of growing wild like the vittariifolium ones are, but they're thinner. So there is that to remember, and you always need to remember with any of these plants is have a look at the roots. What are the roots like? If the roots are super chunky, like you might get with the vittariifolium, like you might get with the clarinervium, then you need to pull back. You need to not constantly be giving it a whole huge amount of water because it will rot quite easily. It's meant to be able to dry out a bit before you do that, because those roots, those thicker ones, are holding on to water. These Anthuriums that have got the thinner roots, however, will appreciate a bit more of that constant moisture basically there. You don't necessarily ever want to let this go fully dry for too long. But I really have enjoyed growing this. Really have enjoyed growing this. Whilst everything rips down on me because I always water before I do these videos because this dum-dum never learns. But friedrichsthalii, 100% if you find this, is definitely one that I would recommend picking up. Moving on to a bit of an underdog kind of thriving story now, because this, and some people that have been here for a while might recognize this, is my Anthurium pendens. And I have poo-pooed on this plant a lot recently because I've kind of said it wasn't doing very much. It's a bit, it kind of grows a bit weird and wonderful. That is its newest leaf there. What has changed, you might ask? Has my opinion changed? Yes. Why has my opinion changed? Because what I was saying before about the vittariifolium, where I thought that all of the pendant-like Anthuriums, Anthurium pendens, by the way, so this has actually got the name of a pendens Anthurium. This is one that I kind of assumed is very similar to the vittariifolium, like I did with all of these, and I really wanted to let it go fully dry, and this was in semi-hydro, and it pretty much, without me realizing, I just thought it was a very slow growing Anthurium. Hated life. Hated life. That's changed. It's moved into Soil Ninja's Anthurium mix, so a soil mix. Within a month of it growing in the soil mix, it brought out probably one of its best leaves since I had it, and within a couple of weeks after that, it grew an entirely new leaf, and it is pristine. You might be able to see what was happening here, so that wasn't getting enough water. The other thing I will say about this, and I don't think it was to do with the plant, because the leaves now are a lot more turgid than this plant's leaves have ever been in the past. They were a bit more flimsy-esque. So, and this one had issues, but the issues that I had with this, and I don't want to say it's because of the plant's propensity for this, I think it was because the care that I was giving it was wrong by letting it dry out, by having it in semi-hydro mix. A lot of my Anthuriums are still in semi-hydro, but I'm also fast realizing that some Anthuriums generally would do better in a soil mix. The other thing that I will say, from my experience and my humblest of opinions, if you're starting off with Anthuriums and they worry you ever so slightly, but you've played around a bit with semi-hydro, start some in semi-hydro, do some in semi-hydro, start kind of eking into that genus of plants a bit more, get comfortable, and then move stuff into soil then when you're a bit more comfortable and you think they need it. Because a lot of the Anthuriums will grow quite happily in semi-hydro for many months and many years. But some of them also on the flip side, and this is a prime example when I thought that it needed to be drying out a bit more, so the semi-hydro would have been perfect. Soil. Game changer. I know, I am preaching to the choir, I get this, but so much better, and I'm actually at the stage where I'm really enjoying this. But as I said, when I was growing it in the way that I thought it should be grown, pest magnets, spider mites, thrips, everything. No mealybugs, I don't think, on this, but the reason that this happened is because when it was very young and immature as a leaf, it got an awful lot, and I don't know whether or not that's going to come up. You might be able to see some of the discoloration on there. It came up, there was a lot of damage, which basically meant the leaf started curling in on itself. So I'm just a bit like, you know what, you can do you, be your weird kooky self at this point, I don't care. We're all a bit odd and a bit strange at times, but this is a bit more what I would expect from this plant, and it is finally, I can finally say that it is doing well, and I can finally say that I am enjoying this, which is why on previous videos when somebody was just like, if you don't want it, send it to me, I'll grow it happily, I'd like to try it. And I say some plants I am ready to get to that stage where I'm just like, you know what, have it, I really never want to see this again. And some plants I'm just like, I don't like it now, but I've not fully given up hope on this plant that it couldn't be something that I enjoy. And I'm quite glad that I did not get rid of this, and I got it to the stage now where it's giving me beautiful, beautiful foliage. Would I say this is massively different from the vittariifolium? And I'm kind of looking at the vittariifolium here. Not massively so, but as I said, this was sold to me as an Anthurium pendens, and I actually never looked at this on whether or not Anthurium pendens is a species. I would like to assume that it is, or whether or not it was an Anthurium and it's a pendant Anthurium, so they just called it Anthurium pendens, and this might be a vittariifolium in disguise. I do not know. But the roots, see, this is the reason why I say this, is these roots have got the potential, if it gets sizable to where it's the same size as my vittariifolium, that they could be the same. So I do not know. Regardless of all that, I am really finally enjoying growing the Anthurium pendens. Now wrap up with the plant that I've been wanting in my collection for years, and I finally got it. I did do an unboxing. I will link it at the top somewhere. And it's already on its second or third. No, it was getting a new leaf when it first came to me, which has hardened off. It then got a new leaf, which is this one right here, which is doing really, really well. You might be able to see some of the structure that you might see when this plant is a bit more mature. And it has got a new leaf that is hardening off as well. This, for the people that haven't been around for the unboxing, is the Anthurium wendlingeri. And I think this was when I first unboxed this, so there was some very, very, very helpful individual that was saying that maybe kind of let it grow like that. But already, even though it was growing upright, I was going to move it into some structure like that, but it's already starting to bend. The growing point is starting to bend to do what all the other pendants are doing. So I might just let it do its thing. It's what I've always done with most of these, and I have found that it does okay. But I cannot tell you how happy I am to own this. I can't say too much about this because I've only been growing it for a couple of months now. But if the growth that I'm seeing currently on this is telling of what this is like moving forward, and I don't think this is true for everybody, because I think I've seen that this isn't one of the fastest growing Anthuriums. This has been super fast for me so far. Super, super fast for me so far. So I have got high, high hopes for this plant. And it's interesting because you might be able to see the structure of the leaf there. So that's the petiole, and then it attaches and widens off really, really quickly. None of the other pendant Anthuriums that I've got have got that. So that very thin kind of petiole and then a wideness altogether. Usually some of the other ones, they start off really thin and go down wider. So this is something that makes this pendant type Anthurium, so the wendlingeri, different. The other big thing, which is the reason why I've got this, which I know I'm going to have to wait for a while before it gets to the point where I can see the reason for me wanting to get this plant, which is the inflorescence. Because if I am not mistaken, the inflorescence for the wendlingeri is a corkscrew. So you know the usual Anthurium inflorescence, which is kind of like a long pointy thing. And we talked about the name Anthurium, and it's the rat tail essentially, or the tail bloom is, and I've done a video on like the Greek terminology there, but this is one that instead of just having that kind of straight inflorescence, it corkscrews. So almost like, you know how you'd get those kind of stereotypical kind of cartoon corkscrew pigtails. I cannot wait to see this in bloom. And I know I might be waiting for a long time, and I know this is nowhere near the stage where it's going to bloom for me, or at least bloom enough that I'm going to get that spiral showing up. But so glad I have finally got this in my care. But coming into my final thoughts and the comparisons here, the thing that I would say, if you're starting off and you've not owned any pendant Anthuriums, I will come back and I will go to the Mama Jamma. Start with the vittariifolium. Every single time, start with the vittariifolium. I have found, not just as a pendant Anthurium, but in relation to all of my Anthuriums, that is the most forgiving pendant, or most forgiving Anthurium that I have owned, or yeah, have ever owned so far. The friedrichsthalii is a good second. The Anthurium pendens, I'm still holding off on. It's okay so far, but it was user error. So maybe then progress to that one. And the wendlingeri, I know, and I mean the problem with the wendlingeri is because there's a few people that want it and there's not that many of them, I don't think, around. It's still relatively pricey at the time that this video is being filmed, so it might not be the easiest one for everybody to get started with, but that would be one that I would say is kind of showing signs that it might be on par with the friedrichsthalii. So that's my kind of 2 cents and my thoughts on my pendant Anthuriums. I'm very curious, do you own any pendant Anthuriums? Have you thought about owning them? What's holding you back, or what made you finally go, you know what, I'm going to go for it? Tell us all down below and tell us which ones you've got or which ones you're thinking about getting, anything that you're doing specifically in terms of their care. Because most of my Anthuriums, including the pendant Anthuriums, have got the same care in my conditions at least. So they get bright indirect light. I know, we're all sounding like broken records at this point. I don't think any of them... the friedrichsthalii, actually looking at it, and the pendants are probably getting more medium type light. And they're doing okay. The wendlingeri and the vittariifolium have always had bright indirect light, and they seem to be loving life. The growing media, as I said, with the exception, actually no, even the, I was just saying this, the vittariifolium, I would move these into a soil mixture. It's just need to balance out how often you might water them. So the wendlingeri and the pendants maybe gets watered a bit more frequently, and something like the vittariifolium gets watered a bit less frequently. But yes, that is everything I wanted to say about some of my favorite Anthuriums. I have to say, pendant Anthuriums, it might not be for everybody. They might be a bit dull for some people. I find them strikingly kind of pleasing to the eye because of those very, very long strap-like leaves. But yes, that is everything I wanted to cover today. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.